Good morning. Welcome to another session on environmental impact assessment. Unit 5 case studies. Course outcome describe the EIA for various infrastructural projects. Learning outcome explain the EIA for housing projects. Specific outcomes explain the impacts of apartment or house construction on the environment. Scope. The object of providing housing is to satisfy the basic needs for shelter. What shelter means and how the basic need for it is actually met will very much depend on the local conditions and traditions and on how advanced the society is, right? So uh, in villages you don't see any apartments or high-rise buildings, big towers and so on, right? Because local conditions are like that, and people generally live in some small houses, right? Maybe G+1, meaning ground floor plus first floor, or maybe at the best second floor, right? And also it depends on the how society is. Developing countries you see a different thing, developed countries you see something different. Broadly speaking, what is meant by the provision of housing is in a narrow sense is creating, maintaining and rehabilitating living accommodation and making available the items required for this purpose, namely the land, infrastructure, that is roads, railway lines, mass transport facilities, telecommunications, drinking water supply, facilities for disposing of waste and wastewater, and energy requirements. Apart from that, building materials, construction technology, and finance. However, the provision of housing is not confined solely to making the actual accommodation available, but also requires measures to create an environmentally acceptable residential habitat and the setting up of other social, cultural, and welfare activities required, right, such as schools, hospitals, that is healthcare facilities, places for public assembly, shops, etc. Right. So the given the scope, we look at the environmental impacts of providing housing or building an apartment in a particular location. Projects aimed at providing or rehabilitating housing. Rehabilitating actually means that uh, a house was already constructed, but it has deteriorated, or there are some lot of repairs to be done, due to which you are renovating the house. So another word or technical word is rehabilitating the house, meaning you are strengthening the members, like the beams, columns, walls, etc. So projects aimed at providing or rehabilitating housing have an impact on the environment through the building activities to which they give rise to. Certain important aspects of these have been outlined below. So development of areas of new housing. There are problems that are difficult or even impossible to solve when housing is being rehabilitated, and these are the problems that have been anticipated when planning new housing. The techniques and planning measures required for this purpose are familiar and well established. The main ones and their accompanying environmental impacts are briefly outlined. So allocating areas for building normally entails a change in the existing land use and a rise in the consumption of raw materials, right? So you need to clear up some of the land areas. So it may be forest, it may be agriculture land, it may be vacant land. You may have to clean it up, right? So if it's vacant land, it's not a problem. If it is agricultural and forest areas, you are creating a lot of harm for the environment by clearing of those things, right? Hence, land suitable for agricultural areas of forest and woodland and ground covering mineral deposits should not be built on if at all possible, right? So better to avoid those areas so that you protect the environment. Farmland in peri-urban areas often serves to supply the needs of the urban population and should not be adversely affected by steps taken to develop the towns. Areas of forest and woodland close to towns represent a valuable resource deserving of protection. Such areas perform climatic and hydrological functions, act as a recreational resource, and often form a source of supply for fuel, building materials, and drinking water supply. The physical location of public utilities and sources of employment, like, is dealt with in other environmental briefs, such as planning of locations for trade and industries, public facilities like schools, healthcare, hospitals, etc. Particularly for housing, closeness to job is often an important location determinant. So generally the houses are provided wherever there are some job opportunities, or where there are some companies or industries, meaning not just next to the industries, maybe nearby the industries, so that people can walk, or travel to the industries and work there. So although we are looking at closeness of the housing with respect to the office buildings. It is important that we don't destroy the environment. Cheap building land will be often available well away from the towns. This, however, not only means a change to the existing use of the land, but also creates a problem that more transport services will be needed. So you need a lot of vehicles going up and down. Once built on such landway, often quite deliberately create a need for land to be switched to other industrial or commercial uses. This being the case, land use regulations will be needed as a part of planning law to control possible emissions and demand for land. So basically, we are talking about changing the land use, and also you may require transport facilities, and possible that it's also possible that some of the nearby areas will be converted into industrial or commercial areas whenever a town is developing. Right, you will see that this is the other way around. That is, first what I told is neighboring to the companies, houses are built. Second one is when houses develop, or the locality develops, when become cities or villages become towns. You will see that some industries are coming up nearby. New areas of housing mean a redistribution of the demand for water, but they may equally well give rise to increase in the demand, a greater amount of wastewater and solid waste, and a need for the appropriate infrastructure to be provided. There will also be a rise in the volume of traffic. When planning new areas of housing, the regional supply and disposal facilities will need to be considered. Insects, which act as vectors for many diseases, constitute a major risk of health for the inhabitants. Poor sanitation, standing wastewater, even open water tanks produce ideal breeding grounds for insect pests. Insects can be successfully combated at lower cost by preventive action than by using of chemicals, for example. The organized collection of solid waste, regular maintenance of open drains, and suitable domestic sanitary systems such as ventilated latrines will reduce health risk in this way. Protection against insects inside building can be obtained by, for example, providing extra nets covering doors and windows. Apart from the question of funding for reasonable supply and disposal facilities, another question of crucial importance is keeping them in good working condition. Provisional and household hygiene is another prerequisite for reducing diseases. As well as the physical requirements mentioned above, public information on the importance of hygiene can play a major role in improving the health. In this connection, it should be remembered that depending on the country, between 30 to 60% of the heads of the household in slum areas and squatter settlements are women. Right? So that has to be taken into account. In buildings, it is the areas of food preparation and storage, number of occupants, that important hygiene requirements have to be satisfied. Where possible, there should be a separate kitchen with an adequate supply of good quality water and good facilities for wastewater drainage. Animal raising is common in urban areas and forms a source of extra income. However, animals can also transmit diseases. Children in particular should be prevented from coming in contact with dung, and animals should be kept away from areas used for utilities and other services or for disposal purposes such as rubbish dumps, for example. Right, so the animals should be kept away from the garbages or garbage yards. Polluted air is another thing that puts human health at risk. Pollution sources in urban areas are domestic heat and energy production, particularly when coal is burnt, the burning of solid waste, road traffic, and industrial emissions. Selecting suitable locations for areas of new housing and analyzing possible ways of improving the local habitat for rehabilitation projects are some of the ways in which improvements can be effected. Like air pollution, noise too is a health risk, but it is one that is rarely given proper weightage. Soundproofing in buildings, for example, is expensive. Where the source cannot be eliminated or its output reduced, viable noise protection options are ensuring adequate separation of the source of the noise, and wherever required, breaking the transmission path by erecting embankments. That is, you build some barriers to prevent the movement of noise from one place to another place, or maybe movement of noise into the buildings. Rehabilitating of housings. The purpose of rehabilitation projects is restrained urban renewal. They are carried out to improve living conditions in existing uncontrolled settlements and slums. In so doing, they avoid demolition and resettlement wherever possible, and instead take advantage of existing social structures and housing to initiate or accelerate the process of building an integrated community. Poor sanitation is a major problem in many existing settlements, hence the improvement of hygiene conditions must be a priority task. This includes providing and developing a reliable supply of water and ensuring controlled disposal of waste and wastewater. Although such projects do In the main, improve the environmental situation settlements. They need to be carefully planned and their running needs to be meticulously monitored if they are not to damage the environment. The following environmental briefs in particular offer detailed planning notes for this purpose. That is, we need to look at urban water supply, wastewater disposal, solid waste disposal, right? So we need to look at those things in detail to see what kind of impacts will come. Right? We have seen something about water supply in the last session. While it is true that high density housing has beneficial effects on the infrastructure costs, land uptake, etc., it also creates problems such as greater surface runoff, hence the risk of flooding, problems with water supply and disposal of wastewater and solid waste, aggravation of consequences of natural disasters, and a less satisfactory habitat and less satisfactory hygienic conditions do occur, right? So these are some of the problems. And you know that especially in metropolitan cities, flooding is very easy. Why? Because they have built up, they removed all the forests and built up buildings everywhere. So there is no possibility of water to enter into the ground surface. So water stagnates, and easily you have flooding, and people suffer like anything. Another objective of rehabilitation projects is to improve the housing stock. Dilapidated old buildings and above all the buildings in squatter settlements are often a health risk. Preference should be given to using local building materials, which may also create jobs. For self-built housing, not only is a flexible application of planning and building standards necessary, but advice from building consultants is needed to prevent hazards and additional costs. Raising the standard of infrastructure in residential settlements also includes the putting down of facilities for public movements such as roads, footways, squares, flight of steps, etc. Such operations increase the sealed ground surface and hence contribute to greater surface runoff. These areas need to be drained. The provision of a road infrastructure increases traffic in areas where they may not be much previously. In this case, regulations to limit, say, motorized private transport may be considered for the purpose of cutting emissions. However, given the importance people attach to private transport, there are several constraints on whether such regulations can in fact be introduced. So it's very difficult to introduce these things because people use cars, motorbikes, and so on. So we cannot stop them. It will often be necessary to work towards building lower standards of development, such as only a single access road per block for the fire services and refuse collection rather than a fully developed system of roads. Right? So we'll continue from here in the next half. Thus, we come to the end of this session. Thank you for your participation. Looking forward to meeting you in the next session.